Yeah, so there's a state law that's going into effect this summer, and all of the cities around the state need to make sure that they have adapted their policies and procedures to be able to be in accordance with that state law around how cities regulate public space camping. And so that's what all cities, including the city of Eugene, have been doing. So we have a set of proposed changes to the city's camping ordinance. And for those who like that kind of thing out there and want to follow along in their scorebook, it's City Ordinance 4.815 and 4.816. And so that's what the City Council has been considering here the last few weeks, and that we just had a public hearing on Monday night.
How did that hearing go? Were there a lot of people there?
There weren't a lot of people there. It was a pretty packed agenda, so 3 different topics, all with a lot of content involved in them. And the bulk of the people who came to speak were speaking on the urban renewal topic that the council was addressing. But yeah, there were a few people that were there to speak about the camping ordinance change as well.
Were they concerns about where the camping might be able to take place? What kind of questions?
You know, we get interest and questions and opinions and things submitted to the city council and to city staff from all over the spectrum. Some from people just trying to understand things better, to folks who are really concerned about what they see as the livability of our community or issues of safety and sanitation, to folks who are very concerned about how our unhoused community members may be treated and the experience that they go through and being unhoused and then also having to move frequently. So all of that gets communicated to our council, and they take all of that in as they deliberate on these things.
That last point is something that I think is a sticking point. The move, having to move a lot as an unhoused resident in Eugene. With this new camping ordinance, am I understanding it correctly that with the way it should be drawn out, that might be eliminated? There might be some more certainty about where they can be?
I would not say that that's true necessarily. It's really the ordinance. What it's doing, especially the proposed changes, is really narrowing and specifying the areas where camping will explicitly be prohibited. So previously, the ordinance prohibits all camping on all city property. And the proposed changes narrow that and specify where it's prohibited based on the risks to public health, safety, and accessibility. And so really its job is to make sure that people are clear on where this won't be permitted, where if it's happening there and people are reporting that it's occurring and the city needs to come out to address it, that those are locations where people will be receiving a notice that says you're going to need to remove items from this area and change this this practice here, so that this city property can be used by all members of the community for the purposes for which they're intended.
What does that enforcement process look like? If you, under the proposed plan, if someone is camping in a place they are not allowed, what happens to them?
So it's a great question, because I want to make clear to folks that despite the changes that we're looking at here, to make the rules, to make the way that things are written around the prohibited locations more specific and more clear, we actually aren't going to see big changes in terms of how this looks or feels in the community, because everything is still going to be based on our capacity to actually go out and address those issues when they're reported. So there's really not going to be any change in terms of the amount of staff or the hours in which staff that do that work are going to be working. So it's not like there's going to be a big change, because as we know, with like a lot of things around our laws and city rules, that just because a law exists or a rule exists, that doesn't mean that people are going to follow that. So it's I'm sorry, I want to make sure that this person is just go straight, it's closed, road's closed.
If you stare at it longer, it'll open, I promise.
Yeah, well, she's got a red light, so she's smart to not
nervous,
go ahead
okay.
and go. But
Yeah, fair enough.
just wanted to make sure, like, don't back up, don't
Yeah.
traffic behind you. Okay, so yeah, so there's not going to really be a change in what people see because our capacity to address those things won't change. So the process and how it works is that when residents report that there's an issue, so this really is across the board, any kind of city regulation out there. So if residents see something they don't think is right, if they think that something that they're seeing in the community is a violation of city code, they can report that online, they can call it in. We always encourage people to use the online system. That's the fastest way to get things in because then they don't have to wait for our open phone hours and to get somebody on the phone. They can provide all that information that staff will need to be able to start a response quickly. But they can do that for anything, and then city staff will basically assess whatever's going on and determine if it indeed is something that is a violation of city code, and then take an appropriate response based on that. So in the case of unsanctioned camping, what happens is that if people observe that occurring, they think it's a violation, they would go online or call that in and report the location that that's happening, and then city staff will come out, take a look, and if indeed there's someone in a place that they're not supposed to be, they'll receive a posting at their campsite that lets them know about the city code that's being violated and that they have 72 hours to move from that spot. And then at the end of that 72 hours, at some point after that, city staff will come back, see if they're still there. If they're still there, they'll make sure that they move and then clean the things up. If they've already gone, they'll see if anything has been left behind that needs to be cleaned up, and then they'll do that. So that's really how that works. The only difference with that is that in our parks, we have park rules that govern the behavior and actions that people do in our city parks. And there is a park rule that very clearly prohibits the erection of structures. So it's among many different types of rules, including things around consumption of alcohol and other things like that. We have a rule against erecting structures. And so when our park staff who visit our parks, very regularly throughout the week, if they are able to identify that someone has come and set up a structure in one of our parks, and that could include tents and small shelters and things like that, if they see that and they can verify that it's been up for less than 24 hours, then they will just go and notify them that park rules being violated and they need to take down the structure to come into compliance with park rules. Nobody has to leave the park. It's okay to rest in the parks and that kind of thing. We just can't have structures there. So they'll let them know about that. If they know that structure has been there for longer than 24 hours, then they'll get the same regular notice that folks do out in the rest of the areas around the community, and that'll be that 72-hour notice that indicates that, hey, on this date at this time, you'll need to have this removed, and they'll come back after that and check and clean up anything that needs to be cleaned up. So that's really the process, and it's well understood that there's going to be a lot of movement that happens where people will be in a spot, and then they'll be asked to move. Sometimes they'll move on their own, and then it'll just kind of rotate around, and the city will go and follow up and do cleanups of those things. The truth is that we continue to have far fewer places, shelter spaces available than we have unhoused people in the community, but also there has to be an expectation that the city is going to function in regard to public health and safety and accessibility for all in our public spaces, and that's really what the proposed changes try to address very clearly.
A couple follow-ups to that. First off, the 72-hour notice. So if you go get a notice, you have 72 hours to vacate, come back in 72 hours, they're still there. What does the city do at that point? Is it law enforcement gets involved, or what happens?
So yeah, usually people will comply during that 72-hour period. If they don't, staff will ask again, and they'll indicate that okay, the time has expired and we need to get this cleaned up now. Sometimes they will, depending on what their schedule is and what else is going on, they may be able to give a little more grace time, and they'll circle back and check with them and let them know that, like, hey, you'll really need to be out by the time we come back, and then if necessary, that we will get the help type of law enforcement and asking people to move. It's not something that people are being arrested for as a regular thing. That's not something that our county jail has capacity for. It's not something that our county prosecutors have capacity or interest in prosecuting those kinds of cases. Really, our law enforcement support is there to try to make sure that the things are happening the way that they're supposed to be, and that, again, the city code is being observed and that the public spaces are being used and accessible for everybody.
By outlining the places that this is prohibited, does it in turn outline the places that camping is permitted?
It really doesn't, because all of the different places that could potentially be, we can't say that those places would necessarily kind of not fall under some kind of another piece of city code or some issue that would make it so that wasn't possible in that location. So, and it's really, if you read the city's code, especially the introduction about kind of the issues that camping create in the community, especially in kind of a perpetual occupation of public spaces. You'll see why this is not something that is a part of, like, this is not being promoted. This is not something that that we're wanting this to happen because it has a detrimental effect for the function of the city. So again, it's very understood that people are going to come and they're going to take their rest when they need to take their rest, and we don't have staff who are working overnights, so there's not any sort of enforcement that's happening during those times of city code. And then the city is up and running and functioning during the day. Residents are going about their business, businesses are operating, schools and shelters are operating, and all of that, and that's when city staff are out to do their enforcement activities. So the expectation is that at that time people are up and they're going to be moving along and complying with city code. So yeah, it's not something that's going to be practical and useful for people to try to say, here's where you can be, because that's not necessarily going to be true based on whatever the other factors may be in those cases. And that's why the city does come out and looks at those different situations when things are reported, because there's always something different at play in terms of who may own the property or who may have an easement to the property, or what are the other things that are happening there. So even though there might be a type of property that somebody might look at this and say, well, maybe this isn't covered in this, there can be other things happening with that property or that situation that would make that not possible.
With this new law, July 1st is the deadline, is when it has to be in effect, right? So July 1st we're in effect. Do you mind, would we be able to do like a rapid fire places that have been kind of hot spots for homelessness, whether or not they fall under this category or not? For example, Washington Jefferson Park, riverfront along the Willamette, businesses in downtown. Are those things that you could maybe just hit yes or no's?
Because of the thing I just said, not easily. Any parks I can say for sure. So all the city parks, Washington Jefferson Park and any other city park, again, there is a park rule that you can't have structures erected. And also parks are closed overnight. So legally, no one can be in parks for any purposes, whether that is to sleep there or to throw frisbees there or to take your dog for a walk there. You're not legally able to be in parks overnight. They're closed. So there was a set aside done for the activity at Washington Jefferson Park during the pandemic based on the public health guidelines in place at the time, that essentially made that temporary camp possible. That's gone away now, so no city parks is it possible under the rules to have structures up, and parks are closed overnight, so people aren't supposed to be there. For other areas, again, it would be best for people to look at the proposed changes to the ordinance, where things are lined out around distances from roadways and the amount of path width clear that needs to be maintained on sidewalks and shared use paths. the distance from waterways and things like that. So it's all kind of in there in terms of being able to take a look at the things that that wouldn't be okay. And of course, none of those things are okay now either under the, I mean, it's just that we're more specific in sort of detailing exactly where those areas are prohibited based on that standard of the risk to public health, safety, and accessibility.
We had this idea today as part of our broadcast where after we do a little bit of like a segment on the show, we do a Q&A about areas around town. Is that something that you think I could feasibly do? Washington Jefferson Park, obviously we covered that. There would be a no there. Along the riverbank, what is it, 100 feet from waterways? Is that the rule?
I think so. I mean, again, I don't even have like kind of the full understanding of some of the terminology in there and about what it means. I mean, I think that essentially it basically means like any of the waterways. Like, no, you can't be down off the bank, into those things. I'm not sure like how far back from the edge of the banks of all those waterways and things that you need to be. There's a lot of areas too that may be included in, there's like wastewater treatment areas and things where they're not actually, it's not a flowing waterway, it's a collection point for for wastewater. That may be a flat area, and so that's that's another good example where it may be something that it's on its face, like, oh, this looks like maybe this is kind of an open space, and maybe it's a requisite distance away from things that I see in here. Maybe I could come here, but if it has got a certain categorization of its function that it serves in terms of our environmental practices around the treatment of wastewater and things like that, then it wouldn't be. It would be one of the things that would be excluded in there. So it's possible. I would say maybe if you wanted to kind of come up with a list of things, you could shoot it to me and I could kind of mull it over and think like, all right, is this something that's going to be fairly straightforward? Because the one thing, as much as I want to try to be helpful, in explaining things to viewers, I also don't want to unintentionally give misinformation about like, oh yeah, this will, and then have it like, well, no, dummy, well, that's not, and so the best thing is again for for folks to take a look at and then the other thing, I guess the other reminder I want to give is that everything right now is still proposed. So until the council actually votes basically on the changes, I'm sure that they'll probably have they'll set one of their meetings coming up where they will actually vote on this. But up until that time, the council could request changes based on things that they hear from the public. There could be other changes to what has been proposed and published so far before they vote on it. So the old "it ain't over till it's over." Let's make sure that folks are paying attention to when the council actually does their vote and what the actual language is at that time, because that'll be the piece that's going forward. But again, it's just so important for people to understand that just like when we have changes to the speed limits and things like that, the law's there, the code is there. It doesn't mean that it's going to be observed, and it doesn't mean that that the city or other agencies are always going to be able to be present and be there immediately and to make compliance happen. So there's not likely to be a lot of change that we see in the community in terms of what's happening, because we already have a very broad ordinance that's being narrowed and specified, but right now, obviously, we're quite challenged in keeping up with the amount of reports that come in from the community about this kind of activity, and we're not able to immediately address those things. And like I said, because of just the conditions that exist with this issue of homelessness, we're not able, we're going to see that kind of cyclical behavior around that, because there isn't, an option for a lot of folks, and so they're going to continue to keep looking for public spaces.
If I'm understanding correctly, the idea behind this whole process that's been going on is because if our number of beds don't equal the number of people that are battling houselessness, we have to allow some capacity of camping in the area because we don't have a facility for them to go to. Is that bit correct?
Not really. I mean, so what we do, I mean, in the process of going and giving notification to folks when they're in violation of the code and that they need to move, there's ample information that's provided about local resources, including the day shelter, the emergency shelter options that exist in the community. And so even though there is, clearly we know from the data that's out that there's far more people who are considered unsheltered than there are shelter spaces that are existing in our area. Nevertheless, there is on a daily basis always spaces available at a couple of the local emergency shelters. And so, again, we're always going to give that advice and information to people and encourage people to go to those locations and seek out safe shelter in lieu of trying to camp in public spaces. So, that's one of the things that we always do. And, there's typically space available in those places. So again, it's not usually accurate that there isn't a place for people to go who are being notified of that need to move.
What do you say to my viewers who may think about downtown Eugene with a little bit of frustration about inaction, about getting people that are unsheltered out of downtown? What do you say to folks that might be looking at this as an opportunity to get stricter about it, and that the city says, hey, we aren't going to necessarily, prosecute or arrest those folks because the DA is not interested?
Well, I mean, it's again, I think we know pretty well that law enforcement and prosecution and that's not a way out of this situation. So we look at practical solutions as much as we can, and we really are looking at kind of the whole picture of how can we get a condition of livability and sort of accessibility and use and safety and public health for everyone, while also acknowledging that we have a terrible crisis right now with the number of unhoused people, and that's why the city's seeking to help create more shelter, to create more affordable housing, and at the same time find practical ways to be able to address this issue. And certainly the use and activity in the downtown core is a huge priority for the city and for the city council, and that's been addressed considerably in the proposed budget for the next biennium. A lot of additions that are seeking to address that situation. So again, we always want to be able to be sensitive and understanding for our community members that are unhoused, but at the same time create a condition where during the daytime when people are using our public spaces, that they feel like they can do that safely, and that it's a sanitary environment, and that everyone has appropriate accessibility to the places they want to visit in our community.